Well, it is good to be with you today. We continue through the 10 Commandments, and we are on the Fifth Commandment. You shall not murder. There it is. Remember, our commandments are broken into 2 tablets. 1, 2, and 3 on the first tablet with how we love our God. And 4 through 10 over here, and how we love our neighbor. Like that. And so we talked last week about the 4th commandment, and I drew this little picture where we saw all the commandments coming out of the first, but the second table of the law all coming out of the 4th and flowing and springing from it, from this commandment having to deal with authority and good order. Now, all these things are, like I said, they spring out of their expansions on what this means to honor father and mother, and how we should then live in relationship to other people, as well as what will happen if we do not, is kind of all rooted in the 4th commandment. So today we find ourselves here in the 5th commandment. And again, God gives us his gifts. And each commandment comes with a gift that God protects with the boundary of the commandment. And so the gift that we have today, if we're talking about murder, is life. It is the gift of life. So as you have been given the gift of life, and so too have all the other creatures around you, you shall not murder them. Seems pretty straightforward. So let's look at what this means, and we'll get into some texts this morning. What does this mean? We should fear and love God so that we do not hurt or harm our neighbor in his body. So there's that negative aspect of what we should be doing. So we should not be doing harming our neighbor's body. But what we should do, the positive side, is help and support him in every physical need. Let's talk about this a little bit. This again seems pretty straightforward. We should not hurt or harm our neighbor in his body, but help and support him. But then there's this word, every. Oh, that's a big word. That means every. Every physical need. Not just the ones I feel like I can help with, not just the ones where I feel like I have time for it. It says every physical need. So this is a convicting commandment for us. It is something that we should consider carefully as we are loving our neighbor. Now, Luther in the Large Catechism, in addition to pointing out that every physical need needs to be taken care of, helped and supported, he also says this in the Large Catechism. He says that we must not kill, Christ sums it up, with hand, heart, mouth, signs, gestures, help, nor counsel. Therefore, this commandment forbids everyone to be angry, except those, as we said, who are in the place of God, that is, parents and government. For it is proper for God and for everyone who is in a divine estate to be angry, to rebuke, and to punish because of those persons who transgress this and other commandments. So that's what I was saying before. It flows out of the 4th commandment. And the other thing here, we'll get to this in a moment as well, after we look at Genesis really quick, is we must not kill with hand, heart, mouth, signs, gestures, help, nor counsel. So we'll talk about this. We're going to talk specifically about the Sermon on the Mount when Jesus talks about this and what it means to not murder somebody, because it's deeper than we think. It's deeper than just, I made it to work without stabbing somebody, and I made it through my day without killing anybody. That's not it. There's more to this. So let's look at the foundation for why we cannot murder, and we find that in Genesis chapter 9. And so God has destroyed the world with the flood, and Noah and his sons and their wives, 8 souls in all, have passed through water to the other side and are alive. Which, by the way, gives us a picture of baptism. But that's not relevant to this discussion necessarily. So God, here at this point in Genesis 9, is reissuing his promise and his commission to Adam and Eve to be fruitful and multiply. But there's also something else here that we'll talk about. So God blessed Noah and his sons, and he said to them, be fruitful and multiply. Right? They have to do the work of Adam and Eve all over again because everybody is dead. So they have to fill the earth and populate it. So that's another thing just to think of as we're talking about, well, we got all these things going on in our world that do have to do with the Fifth Commandment, like rioting, harming our neighbors' bodies in this way, and the subject of racism. But as Christians, because we spring from Noah and this commandment to never be to be fruitful and to multiply, we are not permitted to be racists, basically, because everywhere you go, I heard one pastor say, is a Noah family reunion. There's no human being on earth that didn't come from Noah. So we should not be divided on something as superficial as our skin color. We are all one people. We're all one group. So anyway, be fruitful and multiply. That's the work they have to do. The fear of you and the dread of you shall be upon every beast of the earth and upon every bird of the heavens, upon everything that creeps on the ground, all the fish. Into your hand they are delivered. Every moving thing that lives shall be food for you. So now we are allowed to eat meat. Thanks be to God. Like some steak. That sounds good right now too. And as I gave you the green plants, I give you everything. But you shall not eat flesh with its life, that is its blood. Now there's a reason for that, because we should only be getting our life from one lamb's blood, and that is Christ's blood. And for your lifeblood, I will require a reckoning. And this is where we get into why it's not okay to murder people. Because it's more than just the obvious reason why you probably shouldn't do it. There's a very sound reason that God gives why we should not murder. From every beast I will require it, and from man I will require a reckoning if they take your life. From his fellow man I will require a reckoning for the life of man. Whoever sheds the blood of man, by man shall his blood be shed. For God made man in his own image. This is why it is not okay for you to murder people, or anybody to murder people, because we are made in God's image. Now there is truth here that we lost God's image in the garden when we fell into sin. And yet we are still made, and it's just still this, we're still these people that God has made that are separate from the animals. So that's another thing. I got all kinds of asides today. Another thing to consider is that we are not animals. The world talks about us as though we are just another kind of animal that has evolved from whatever, but we are not animals. We are separate from the animals, although there is overlap in how we function, because, I don't know, God built on a main system, I suppose, or used common themes when he was creating. But we are made in his image. So we have this ability to reason and think and to do things that other animals do not have to do, or are not able to do. And because we are made in God's image, if anything kills us, we kill it. Right? If it's a beast, we see this already. Like you see this kind of in our laws. Say a dog bites a kid, what do with the dog? They put it down. And there's instances where you can fight for that, and sometimes the kid was being an antagonist. Who knows? But if there's a lion that eats a person or something, they kill the lion. And that's this occurring in our even still today. And from his fellow man, I will require a reckoning as well. And so we have the fourth commandment again to make sure that this does not get out of control. And so we wield the sword, or the government wields the sword on behalf of the people, so that you are not running around with vengeance and retribution and getting back, an eye for an eye. That is controlled and mediated by the government and the jury and all these things. But from his fellow man, I will requiring a reckoning for the life of man. We still see that today as we punish murderers. Whoever sheds the blood of a man, by his blood shall be shed. For God made man in his own image. And you, be fruitful and multiply. So he reiterates the promise, increase greatly on the earth, multiplying it. Now that was enough for everybody for a long time. And so then Jesus shows up and he starts teaching, and he basically tells them, hey, what you're doing out of order. You think you believe the law, but you do not believe the law, and you are not doing it correctly. So there's more here that we need to talk about. So Matthew 5. Jesus is teaching on the Sermon on the Mount. And he says, you have heard that it was said of those of old. So this is in the tradition of the elders, which is not the Word of God. And he is correcting a lot of these traditions in the Sermon on the Mount. You've heard, oh no, this is actually, when he's, those of old is actually, I'm sorry, I made a mistake. This is actually the Fifth Commandment. So this is Scripture. But he is dealing with the traditions of the elders as well in this sermon. You shall not murder. Whoever murders will be liable to judgment. But I say to you, oh boy, anyone who is angry with his brother will be liable to judgment. Whoever insults his brother will be liable to the council. Whoever says you fool or raka, empty-headed, will be liable for the fire of hell. Yikes. So if you are offering your gift at the altar and there remember that your brother has something against you, leave your gift there before the altar and go. First be reconciled to your brother and then come and offer your gift. Come to terms quickly with your accuser while you are going with him to court, lest your accuser hand you over to the judge and the judge to the guard and you be put in prison. Truly I say to you, you will never get out until you have paid the last penny. So this changes how we understand murder quite a bit, because not only is it something that you do with your hand, but it's also something that happens in your heart and with your tongue. So here's your lips. Murder is much broader than we think. Now here's something interesting too. Because I said this all flows out of the Fourth Commandment, but all of this also flows into the 9th and the 10th Commandment. Luther says this in the Large Catechism. For example, when your neighbor sees that you have a better house or home, a larger family and more fertile fields, greater possessions and fortune from God than he does, he gets in a bad mood. He envies you and he speaks no good of you. So by the devil's encouragement, you will get many enemies who cannot bear to see that you have any good, either bodily or spiritual. When we see such people, our hearts also would like to rage and bleed and take vengeance. Then there arise cursing and blows. From them, misery and murder finally come. All right, so here's something interesting that Luther's pointing out here, kind of in keeping with what he's talking about in the Fifth Commandment, or in the Sermon on the Mount, what Jesus is talking about in the Sermon on the Mount. Your neighbor looks and sees what you have, and he covets. That's the 9th and 10th commandment. And then he speaks ill of you. That's the 8th commandment. And then he wants to steal and envy. That's the 7th commandment. And finally, it leads to cursing and blows and misery and murder. And that's the 5th commandment. So murder most often comes from coveting, which starts here in the heart, wanting those things that God has not given to you, but given to others. Another cause of murder is the 6th commandment, adultery. So you've heard, there's all kinds of movies and books about, somebody finds their husband or wife in bed with another person and so kills them and the lover, and it's a whole mess, and then there's all the ramifications. There's a reason why these stories are compelling, because they are rooted in truth. Right? We know that there is more to murder than just killing. And Jesus says it explicitly in the Sermon on the Mount. Now, so we've looked here at why we should not murder from Genesis 9. That murder is deeper than we thought from Genesis 5. And so we have our reading today that is given to you in your packet from Genesis 14. And this we'll actually see is on the positive aspect of it. So remember here, we have a negative thing, so we shouldn't hurt or harm our neighbor in his body, which includes everything we just talked about, but we should help and support him in every physical need. We're going to see Abram do this. So let's read through this. Now, if you approach this text, you might have noticed the first paragraph here is a little tough to get through. Okay? I'm going to sum it up in a nutshell. Fighting. That's all that's going on here. There's all these names and places and things. You could spend a while actually digging up through, looking at commentaries or Googling things to figure out who these people are. Amraphel, king of Shinar, Arioch, king of Elasar, Tidal, king of Goim. These kings made war, right? That's what this whole paragraph is. 12 years they served him. In the 13th year they rebelled. They were defeated. They turned back and they came to Mishpat, that is Kadesh, and they defeated all the countries, so they took out the Amalekites, also the Amorites who were dwelling there. So there's just war and battles going on here. And then this is where it gets, we'll get here into why this is important when we get to Abram in a second. But this is setting the stage for what happens with Abram and Lot. The king of Sodom, the king of Gomorrah, now you've probably heard of those cities, they end up getting destroyed. The king of Admah, the king of Zeboim, and the king of Bela, that is Zoar, went out and they joined the battle in the valley of Siddim. And Chedorlaomer, king of Elam, Tidal, king of Goim, all those guys we mentioned before. 4 kings against 5. They have this knockdown, drag-out fight in the valley of Siddim. It was full of bitumen pits, so these are like those are like tar pits. So this is a cool place to fight, I guess. Make a good movie where you got guys falling into the tar pit, maybe. And as the kings of Sodom and Gomorrah fled, some fell into them, and the rest fled into the hill country. So the enemy took all the possessions of Sodom and Gomorrah and all their provisions, and they went their way. So they plundered Sodom and Gomorrah, chased them off, and they also took Lot, the son of Abram's brother. So this is Abram's nephew, or Abraham, as he'll be named later, takes Abram's nephew Lot, who was dwelling in Sodom, and his possessions, and they went their way. So they got a hostage and a slave in Lot. Then one who had escaped came and told Abram the Hebrew, who was living by the oaks of Mamre the Amorite, brother of Eshcol, and of Ener. These were allies of Abram, so he's got friends. Abram is not on his own. Praise be to God. When Abram heard that his kinsmen had been taken captive, he led forth his trained men, born in his house, 318 of them, and went in pursuit as far as Dan. And he divided his forces against them by night, he and his servants, and defeated them and pursued them to Hobah, north of Damascus. Then he brought back all the possessions and also brought back his kinsman Lot with his possessions and the women and the people. So we see Abram then, who hears that his kinsman has been taken, and he drops everything, gets together some soldiers, and chases them down, takes over their forces by night, defeats them, and then he brings back all their things. So he not only helps by keeping the 5th commandment, but also the 7th commandment, which is to not steal, but help our neighbor keep his possessions. So he's bringing back these as well. So Abram is doing a good thing here as he is saving them. So this is the reading then. We see this very clearly, this neat thing. We see this neat thing here where where Abram saves Lot and keeps the 5th commandment in this way. Now there's one other thing I want to point out too, that I just remembered. And that is that we see Jesus do this as well. And we see him do it in spades. Because we were not created to kill and to murder one another. So you'll see this over and over and over again in the New Testament. How Jesus keeps the 5th commandment. And how he keeps it perfectly. So he keeps it not only as the one who created, but also as a man who sees suffering of people and so does something about it. Because he is both God and man. So this is just one instance, Matthew 14, but as you know, there are many miracle instances, many miracle accounts that are in the Gospels, but this will suffice to make the point here. Now, when Jesus heard this, so this is here in this text, he hears that John the Baptist died, his cousin, was beheaded. And Jesus just wants to go take a break and mourn. He withdrew from there in a boat to a desolate place by himself. When the crowds heard it, they followed him on foot from the towns. When he went ashore, he saw a great crowd. He had compassion, and he healed their sick. That is what Jesus does. Jesus comes into the scene. Quiet little night in Bethlehem, grows up in the wisdom and stature of God and man, as it says when he goes to the temple. And he begins his ministry, and he starts healing left and right. He starts doing all these amazing things. But one of the main things he does is when crowds come to him, he heals them. And this is keeping that part of the Fifth Commandment, to help our neighbor in every bodily need. And he is doing that. The other thing he is doing is giving us a picture of creation as it should be. Not fallen, but he's correcting what is broken by us by his very presence and his acts of healing, which is pretty cool to see, especially as he goes through his ministry. So that is the Fifth Commandment. These are just some things for you to meditate on, to ponder. But dear saints, you shall not murder. And so, as you shall not murder, do not be afraid, but be at peace. Have a good day.